be available after a few hours once the webinar is completed. We have 3 presenters today. We have our keynote speaker, Professor Gaurav Sharma. He's from the University of Rochester, and myself, Dhanukumar Patnshetty, and also my colleague from India, Ranbir Sade, who is the IEEE Client Services Manager as well. A quick run through on the agenda. Today we have a lot of things to share with all of you. And when we started doing this workshop, there were many questions. We started doing this author workshop from almost like 10 years now, over a decade, and we did had a lot of interactions with the authors, with the users of IEEE Explore Digital Library, and we put together a deck which will answer mainly these things today. How to select the right publications for your submission. So all of us, when our manuscript is ready, the first thing is, where should I submit this? Okay. This session will answer that. It's also very important to identify and avoid predatory publishers as well. So it actually a very important topic to be discussed. That is something which we are going to address it today. And the authors keep asking, what is that a reviewer or an editor look in the submissions? We're also discussing about what are some of the common reasons the papers get rejected, and how you can really optimize the article's discoverability, weaves, and citations as well. There's a small bit on the research strategies using the IEEE Explore Digital Library, and also what are the various authorship tools available from the IEEE. Why one should consider open access publishing, and what are the various open access options we have for all the authors and institutions. So IEEE is just about the IEEE. IEEE is the leading authority voice in a variety areas ranging from electrical engineering. We are a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is advancing technology for humanity. We are primarily a membership organization having more than 450,000 members globally. Other than the membership as a core area of activity, we are also leading technical conference organizers. We're also leading standards developer, plus publisher of not only journals and conferences, but also standards, ebooks, and e-learning courses as well. In the IEEE Explore Digital Library, we have more than 6 million documents available, and we keep adding close to 2,000 documents on an average every month. The platform attracts more than 24 million downloads per month, and also the traffic, in terms of traffics, we have 8 million. We see 8 million unique users each month. IEEE Explore Digital Library has more than 6 million documents. 1.3 million are coming from the 220 top cited journals, magazines, and transactions. There also majority of the content is from the conferences as well. 2/3 of the content is from the conferences. We have approximately 5,000 approved and published IEEE standards in key technology fields. In terms of ebook collections, we not only have IEEE's publications in the IEEE Explore Digital Library, but also IEEE has partnered with various publishers to have their content indexed in the IEEE Explore Digital Library. We also have e-learning courses, and there are some content coming from our partner publishers as well. The main mission of IEEE is to foster technological innovation and excellence for the benefit of humanity. One of our core values is to be trusted and unbiased source of technical information and forums for technical dialogue and collaboration. One of our goals is to drive global innovation through broad collaboration and the sharing of the knowledge. IEEE's publication strategy and goals are centered on advancing technology for humanity by serving as a trusted source of information, driving ethical innovation and empowering technology professionals through new formats, interdisciplinary collaboration and user-centric experiences. We aim to enhance publications by exploring new formats like podcasts, leveraging analytics and AI, and strengthening the ethical monitoring to create a seamless and inclusive environment for authors, editors, and readers. IEEE inspires intellectual curiosity and support discovery and innovation among the next generation of technology innovators through accessible content and new formats. IEEE reinforces ethics monitoring process and policies related to publication and editorial misconduct while providing education and training to ensure integrity. We provide authors with the choice to publish in a traditional journal or in a fully open access journal. So IEEE continues to provide more options and choices to support the work needs of all the authors and researchers. To discuss all of this today, we have one of the eminent speaker with us, Professor Gaurav Sharma. Um, um, he is known to everybody who works in the image processing, signal processing, many other areas. In fact, he has visited India a couple of times to talk on this topic in various cities across India. He's a professor at University of Rochester. He has authored over 230 journal and conference papers. He is inventor of 54 US patents. He's also the chair of IEEE TAB PSPB, that is Publication Services and Products Board and Services Committee, from Jan 2025 to present. He is an editorial board member of proceedings of the IEEE from Jan 2022 till date. Is also currently member at large, Board of Governors, IEEE Signal Processing Society. He was the editor-in-chief of IEEE Signal Processing Society from Jan 18 to December 2020. He also served as chair of the IEEE Conference Publication Committee, Jan 2017 to 2018. He's a treasurer. He was a treasurer of Publication Services and Products Board for almost like 3 years, from Jan 2015 to 2017. He was also on the advisory board of one of the flagship magazine of IEEE, that is IEEE Spectrum, in the year 2014. He has had a long-standing IEEE involvement, and he has been a member since 1989, and when he started as an undergraduate student member. He's also currently fellow of the IEEE. So welcome to you, Professor, and we're looking forward for your insights. Over to you.
Thank you, Dhanu. So I'm going to try and see if I can turn my screen on also. Previously, when I turned the screen on, the audio was breaking up. So if that happens, I will turn my... Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. Dhanu's already done a good job of introducing myself, and so I will not spend much more time on that. I'll be focusing on sort of tips and best practices on how. This is based on my own experience as an author, as a reviewer, and as an editor and editor-in-chief for the IEEE Transactions Image Processing previously. In this case. Okay. So I'm going to disconnect my camera to make sure that the audio at least comes through clearly in this case. So a little bit of this is the overview. I'll be talking about various topics in this order, particularly highlighting sort of different types of publications, trying to help you figure out how to decide which publication to consider submission to, finding the right venue for submitting your work to, some guidance on writing a technical paper, some of the key points which I've learned over the years based on my experience, talk a little bit about the peer review process to give you insight into what goes on after you submit your manuscript, and then talk about ethics considerations and etiquette in terms of submission. Question and answers, as Dhanu and others have already indicated, would be through the Q&A sort of interface on this platform. So please submit your question answers there. We will respond to them as we can. If there are questions we're not able to respond to in the session, we will get back to you as we later on. So just a little bit about my institution. I come from the University of Rochester. This is a small private research university in upstate New York in Rochester. but has a fairly outsized footprint in terms of impact. We've had a good number of, among our alumni and faculty members, we count a good number of Nobel Prizes, Pulitzer Prizes, Guggenheim Fellows, and MacArthur Fellows. As far as the total size of the university goes, it's about 1,000 faculty, 11,000 students, and we have a good number of degree programs. My editorial experience, I have previously served as editor-in-chief for the IEEE Transactions and Image Processing. This is the largest full-length journal for the IEEE Signal Processing Society. And prior to that, I also served as editor-in-chief for the SPIE ISNT Journal of Electronic Imaging. And then I currently serve on the IEEE Publication Services and Products Board. This is the board which sets the policy for IEEE publications and a variety of policies in this case. So here's sort of the segment I'll be talking about. I'll be talking a little bit about how to select the right publication for submission and publication. Some things about writing a paper, in particular about things to keep in mind in terms of paper structure, and also some key details that you want to make sure you do not miss before you submit. A little bit about the submission process and peer review, and then importance of ethics in publishing. So one of the first questions you may encounter when you're trying to do some research work and considering publishing it is to see how do you select which place to submit this to. Okay. So the kind of things that you want to take into consideration include what is the reputation of the publisher you're considering? What is their standing? How are they regarded in this case? Okay. Does the journal have a strong peer review process that can help you improve your work and also make it more visible to the community so that people will actually be looking at it and possibly using it further and building upon it? Okay. You may want to look at journal quality. In particular, in some cases, it may be important for you to consider whether the journal is indexed or not, and does it have an impact factor. If in certain cases, institutions count only in journals which are indexed, so something which is a fairly new journal which may not yet be indexed is something which may be something you may want to consider in that setting. However, recognize also that journals, when they start in a new area, often they would go on to become indexed, and then the new areas often are the ones which will take over in the future and become larger. So you have a better chance of having a broader impact if you start in a new area. So this is something you have to balance based on your own consideration. Okay. If you are considering open access journals, then you may want to look at the directory of open access journals also. That helps you and filter out some of the predatory journals by ensuring that you're not getting drawn into those. Okay. And then finally, last but not least, it's also important to have a consideration about what's the dissemination platform that the journal is on. Okay. Is that something which gets significant traffic? Is it easily accessible and stable? Because this will ensure that your work is something which people can actually access and will be visible to. So if you take these factors into account, then IEEE is actually ranks up pretty high as a publisher of technical content in IEEE fields of interest. Our journals are by far the most respected and trusted in our fields of interest. It's been a long-standing sort of resource for technical information in these fields, with a history going back as far as 1884. And then these publications have a rigorous peer review process with established sort of policies and practices that ensure high quality standards. That is what the Publication Services and Products Board for the IEEE does. Other publishers do not necessarily have the same governance process in trying to maintain this. We have good relations with a number of other publishing partners, such as people who index the content and who make the content discoverable, including Google search in this case. So IEEE ranks pretty high as a publisher in this. And in almost all academic circles, an IEEE publication would normally be considered as a good mark towards your career. So within IEEE, how could you select your target options for you to search? One is to use the publication recommender. This is a tool that IEEE makes available to authors as a way to try and select what is an appropriate publication to choose between. This is the link to this tool. So you can use this to search. Also importantly, ask people who are more experienced, because they will have a knowledge about, you know what, this work would be ideal for this particular journal, and this is the one which you should target. So speak to people who are more experienced. If you're in doubt, also feel free to email the EIC. We have this type of work. Do you think it would be fitting in your journal? Okay, so this you should, but before doing that, make sure you do your homework first. So read the published aims and scope of the journal to see that whether your work aligns with that or not, and only then contact the EIC. Okay, so for instance, if your paper is about, let's say, a new type of semiconductor for power devices, and you're trying to send that to the IEEE transactions image processing, obviously that is not a good fit. And if you send me a question about it, I would say this person has clearly not done their homework. Okay, so make sure you do your homework first. Use publicly accessible information to look at what is an appropriate journal for you. And then if there is still some doubt, then feel free to contact the relevant people in this case. Now, one question that you may encounter as a student if you're a fairly early career is whether to consider a journal or a conference. So the journal papers, and this is not universal, but by and large, this is true in our fields of interest. A journal article is largely a fully developed presentation of your work. So this is sort of where you've taken a research question, explored it to its logical conclusion, and are now trying to report on the results from that study in this case. So you have a fairly comprehensive piece of work on a particular topic. That is what a journal paper is supposed to represent. A conference paper, on the other hand, can represent many different kinds of work. Often it is representing work in progress. So you're still working on a topic. You have some advance that you would like to report as preliminary results. This is what you present as a short conference paper, maybe about 4 pages, as opposed to a journal article, which is often times even 14 pages in that case. Okay. So one of the purposes you may write a conference paper is to gain early stage feedback on your research. So as you go to a conference and present this, others may see your presentation and give you feedback. Wait a minute, you know what, you maybe want to look at this as an alternative, or this is a way you could enhance what you're doing. Okay. Now there are differences between fields in these areas. In some fields, you can also have large length conference papers, which are relatively long, maybe 8 to 12 pages again in this case. And in those cases, you would consider those as the equivalent journal papers, as fairly comprehensive in this case. So keep in mind that there are also differences between subfields within the IEEE fields of interest. But this is the broader guidance that I would give you in this case. Now, factors you may want to consider when choosing a publication. If you're looking at journals versus conferences, these journals I've already highlighted are very well regarded in our fields of interest. And in a lot of career advancement situations, a publication in an IEEE journal is considered as a very positive mark on your progress towards tenure, towards promotion, and so on. Okay. IEEE conferences are also recognized, but it's sort of the expectation is the conferences are really reporting work in progress. The journals are representing much more comprehensive, complete accomplishments in this case. Okay. Some disadvantages, often the conference rate, the submission rate for a lot of conferences, if the idea is for them to be inclusive, to have more people participate and share their work and also grow the community, then the acceptance rates are quite high for conferences. So often conferences will have acceptance rates close to 50%. Some will have maybe a bit higher, some will have maybe a little bit lower. And then journals, on the other hand, tend to have a lower acceptance rate because they're looking for really much more comprehensive work and much more impactful work, which is done to completion. So the number of chances of being rejection may be high if you submit to a journal. Right. IEEE has a wide range of publications that address needs of our author communities with over 230 what they call periodicals. Periodicals is a general grouping which includes journals as well as magazines in this case. And yeah, so if you're looking at a journal, you should be looking at what the readership is, what community is the one who they're representing, what kind of work have they published in the past, how does your work relate to that, and what type of articles are they looking for. So there are various publications like the Proceedings of the IEEE, which is one of the flagship journals of the IEEE at the moment, which publishes only survey, tutorial, and review articles. I serve on the editorial board at the moment. So their goal is to have these really insightful, long-lasting surveys which would allow somebody to learn about a new field. If you send original research to that publication, that will be rejected because they're not looking to publish original research. On the other hand, most of the other publications are focused on publishing original research and not review articles of the nature. So keep in mind that you should look at the journal from the perspective of what you're trying to submit in this case. Okay. For conferences, the key consideration is the expectation is normally that when you submit to a conference, you will go and present there. So you have to make sure that the calendar aligns with your plans and you can be there to present the work and to also participate in the community. So check the conference calendar. You will also have to align with the deadlines for the submission of your paper. If there is a period in which the review becomes available and you're required to provide responses to the reviews as a rebuttal, that's also something you would have to plan for and so on. Okay. So key aspect is you have to ensure you'll be able to present. Okay. So you may also want to have considerations about whether you want to publish open access or the traditional subscription route. What is the difference between this? If journals which are fully what are called gold open access have the only option to publish there is that your article is something that once it's accepted and published becomes fully openly accessible to anybody anywhere, okay, without having a subscription to the journal in this case. Okay. The same is true for the hybrid journals if you choose your article to be open access by paying an open access fee. Now, in order for this to be sustainable, there has to be some way for this to support itself. And the way that is done by all publishers is through having article publishing charges. So if you're publishing on open access, you would have to pay an article publishing charge. Why would you want to do this? Well, in a number of cases, your funders require you to do this. So if your funding agency has a mandate saying that any articles that you publish from this funded research has to be published open access, then this is something which you have to consider. Okay. Also, as an individual, you may want to consider this because this may improve your visibility of your article because more people can access it as opposed to this being behind a subscription paywall. And often these journals also have a shorter submission to publication time, so you can expect faster feedback for many of these journals. So these may be some reasons to consider open access. And there'll be further discussion that Dhanu will do later in the session. So with that background, I'll now talk when writing your paper. What kind of things should you keep into mind? And based on my own experience as an author, reviewer, editor, what kind of considerations you may want to keep in mind as an early stage. So the biggest point that I would make is when writing any paper, always keep the audience in mind, okay? Your primary audience is the authors that are ultimately going to read these papers. So your content should be appropriate scope and level to the audience. So if there's a particular journal that you're considering, what is the technical field that the readers of the journal are familiar with? And your paper should be targeting that readership primarily. Now, the editors and reviewers are looking also to serve that author community for that particular journal. So they're also aligned with what they're looking for in terms of the final audience by ensuring that the content is appropriate in scope and level for that particular venue. They're also looking to see material that is clearly written so you can easily understand what is being described, what is the new approach that is being proposed over here, how it is being done, and what are the main results and conclusions. So that is something you're looking for a very clear description about in this case. Okay. Obviously, publishing has evolved over time. We use a number of sort of elements in a manuscript to make sure the work is presented clearly in a most well understandable form by using illustrations, tables, graph, and these components should be there appropriately used in the manuscript in order to make this the most effective communication of your work to a reader in this paper format. Okay, and you should cite references that are current and relevant to the subject. So I'll talk briefly about several of these aspects in the following slides, but the key point for you is to always keep the target audience in mind. If you're writing this paper for a particular journal, then it should be appropriate for the audience readership for that journal. Okay. What are the other aspects to keep on is the question of scope. If you're considering a particular journal, is your article appropriate for that particular journal? I already gave an example of this. If you have a new power semiconductor innovation, then clearly that does not belong in a journal on image processing. Okay. Now that's an extreme example. There'll be subtle nuances of that. And as you get to subtle nuances, you will have to look at the aims and scope of the journal to assess whether your article is appropriate for a given journal or not. A key thing that editors and reviewers are looking for is the novelty and significance. Is this original material? Meaning that is this doing something different from what has already been published previously? And is it meaningfully advancing the field? So guidance you may take is that this should not be at the level of a homework problem. A homework problem that you've attempted, maybe the problem is not something that is very, or maybe a new homework problem is one way to describe it, is not something that would be really novel and significant enough to be published as a paper. It should be significant enough while also being novel. Okay. Other aspects you're looking for is clarity. Are the ideas expressed clearly, concisely, and logically? And that's in that order. First, you want to make sure the presentation is clear. Actually, I'll rephrase that. The appropriate order would be logical, clear, and concise in that sequence. So first thing you want to ensure is that you have the logical structure right. Then you want to ensure you have clarity. And finally, you want to make sure you're describing things as concisely as possible. Okay. You may look at the validity of the overall approach. Is the overall study well designed and executed? Have you used the right tools and techniques for that particular problem? What are the data that you're using? If there's a common data set used on a particular problem and you haven't used that and you're addressing the same problem, the question naturally arises why. Nowadays, there are also considerations about any data, about any research involving human subjects to make sure that you're compliant with all the ethical requirements in those scenarios. So you should also look those up. Okay. Last but not least, I would advise you to pay attention to detail. So your submission should be formatted as per the journal requirements. You should have figure text which is legible rather than these extremely tiny fonts which you have to magnify 800% to try and read those. The reference list should be typeset appropriately for the journal and so on. Okay. This is important because, among other things, attention to detail is something that reflects on the entire work as a whole. So if the presentation has not given attention to detail, invariably the conclusion, and this is often the right conclusion, is that if there's not attention to detail in the presentation of the work, then there's also probably not enough attention to detail in the actual work itself. Okay, so you will also benefit from making sure you've done the appropriate thing in terms of polishing your manuscript before you submit. Okay. All right. So there are many resources available on how to write a technical paper. I will talk briefly about some of the aspects here, but I'll refer you to several of the references I list over here and some of the ideas. Okay. The best advice for you I would have if you're beginning as an author is that if you want to learn how to write, first learn how to read well. Okay. Read publications in good venues, so which are sort of accessible at your level. Good places to start are IEEE magazines, because the magazines are meant to be broadly accessible articles without requiring too much specialized technical background. Then you can also look at the IEEE Potentials, which is IEEE student magazine. And then next stage would be look at tutorial surveys and journals, which often will provide you an introductory way to access a particular field. Okay. As you start reading, you will encounter these stages. In some cases, you may have to trace back to connect with what you know. So you may not be able to follow an article on its own. You may have to look at what are the basic articles it builds upon, read those, and then track back to the point where you can understand and follow and build up to the understanding of the current paper. Okay. Your goal should be to follow what is written. Ultimately, you will get to a point where you'll be able to start discriminating between, you know what, this article is well written. I have got something which I can understand from this clearly and take the learning with me. Or this article is poorly written. I will have to spend a lot of time to understand this. Only if this is really crucial for me, do I want to invest the time. Okay. So the final stage will be where you'll be able to understand what is written and then appreciate what the author has gone through in order to make sure the ideas are communicated well in the cases where the articles are written well. Okay. And those are the articles you want to learn from and emulate in your own writing. Okay. And in that writing, you can start small. You can begin with a small advance. There's nothing wrong with that. But make sure that you try and emulate the well-written articles rather than just looking at anything that is published. So a few things about paper structure, things to keep in mind. So the typical structure for paper in our fields, which is in the technology fields, tends to be a title, abstract, introduction to the topic and the prior work in this area, a section on the methodology. This is where the new work that you have done, which is described. Then finally, results, discussion, conclusion, and references. Now, there will be within subfields, but this is the predominant structure that is there in the IEEE fields of interest. Okay, so obviously, if the work is more experimental or looking at exploring a hypothesis, then the structure will be slightly different. But this is the predominant methodology. So keep in mind that for your discipline, things may vary. So here's an example from the IEEE transactions image processing. I'll be using this paper as an example for highlighting several aspects. This is one of our own papers from a while back in the transactions image processing. All right. Okay. So the first part is the title. This is what a reader would first encounter when they look at your paper. And this, in some sense, will decide for the reader whether they want to look at the article any further. So this is answering the question, is this article really relevant to me? Should I really be investing the time to read this further? Okay. So goal should be that if this article is on the topic that is relevant to the reader, then it should really grab the reader's attention. Okay. And your overall goal is to describe the content of the paper using this very few words. So maybe like 10 to 15 words would be the maximum that you have for a title in this case. So you need to be crisp, concise, using keywords, but avoiding jargon in this case. Okay. So here's an example of a title that you could use for every paper, how we solved an important problem in a certain application. Okay. I could use that for almost any paper that I've written. Okay. However, this title is so generic that it does not really communicate anything meaningful about what we did. Here is the title for the paper, which I used as an example: Per Colorant Color Barcodes for Mobile Applications, an Interference Cancellation Framework. So it's both telling you what is the paper about. So it's about color barcodes. What is the sort of new thing over here? We're proposing these on a per color and channel basis. What is the application setting? Mobile phone applications. That's where a lot of these barcodes are being used today. And what is the approach and novel methodology and interference cancellation framework that's been proposed? So that's sort of a title which tries to give you a lot of information in a few words only. Okay. After the title comes the abstract. And the abstract is intended to be sort of a condensed version of the article as a whole. This is covering aspects about what is the significance of this work, what is the novelty, what is new that is being presented, what is the approach, what is the methodology, what are the main findings and conclusions. Okay. So what you did, how you did, what are the main findings, and why are they useful and important is the part you want to cover. And all this you need to cover in about 150 to 250 words. That's the typical length of an abstract. Okay. So Mark Twain is known to have said, I would have written you a shorter letter, except I did not have the time. Okay. So to present your ideas more concisely in a shorter presentation is actually more challenging than to describe them and ramble on and on. So the abstract is something you should take a lot of time to make sure it's written well and polished. People will sometimes focus on writing the article, and then finally when they're trying to put together the abstract at the end, they will try and put together that in a very hurried manner. And I would advise you strongly against doing that. Okay. The abstract is very important because for most readers, after the title, this is the next thing they will focus on. And this will really determine whether they read the rest of the article or not. Okay. So you look at the title, you say, okay, this seems relevant to me. You look at the abstract, and now you're trying to figure out, is this something which, two things, is this something which is, the details are relevant to me? And secondly, do I have a chance of understanding them? If the abstract is poorly written, and you conclude, wait a minute, from this abstract, I can't make head or tail about what they're talking about, then your conclusion would also be that it's not probably worth reading the rest of the article, because that's also likely to suffer from the same problems. Okay? So you should spend a good amount of time on writing, reviewing, and editing your abstract, and rather than writing that as a total afterthought. Okay. So I already covered this. Some journals these days also require a graphical abstract, which is trying to highlight in a single figure what the paper is about. Okay, so here's an example of an abstract. I'll not spend time reading the whole thing, but I'm highlighting over here that we're covering these different aspects, what we did, how we did it, what are the main results. So in this case, what we did was, I'll maybe just summarize very briefly, we proposed using 3 channels to put 3 different barcodes in a color image. So in printing, you use channels of cyan, magenta, and yellow, and that's what this work is talking about. So you put a colored barcode in each of the 3 colored channels, which you use for printing. Okay, and then you capture them using RGB cameras, which is what all of us are using, and then can discriminate and decode these 3 channels by using this technique of interference cancellation. So how the result, how we did it, that's this part, by sort of using 3 channels, capturing canceling the interference between the cross channels, and then what are the main results. So we can get a 3-fold increase in the data rate, and what are the main results, where do they apply? So they can be used for QR codes, Aztec codes, and summary. Okay. Some guidance on this. Traditionally, these papers were written in 3rd person. Nowadays, almost it's more common in engineering disciplines, at least, to write them in the 1st person using the present tense. You want to minimize unneeded words or sentences. You want to be specific to the extent possible. Focus on the audience. Okay. So for this abstract, one critique which I would have is that it's not giving me any quantitative characterization of what is the improvement or what is the quantitative characterization of the results we have. And there's a reason for that, because the extensive experiments are over so many different options that to try and summarize that in the abstract would make the abstract unduly long, because we did several different printing devices, several different capture devices, also several different types of barcodes. So you have to exercise guidance. The fundamental rule above all rules would be the rule of common sense. You have to try and exercise common sense above all. Right. After the abstract, there's usually a set of keywords. And these are the keywords which will really be used for directing search on various topics to your paper. So you want to keep them strongly in mind when trying to put together these keywords. Okay. So somebody who's interested in the topic of a paper, these keywords should be something which should pop up and direct them to your paper in this case. So they should be specific, something which facilitates search, and obviously logically applicable and applicable to the content you're talking. The next part of the abstract is usually the introduction. So this is sort of setting the field for your work. So rather than just a generic overview of the area, the target is to really bring the reader toward your specific work that you're going to present in this case. So you begin with the general kind of outline about why this problem is of interest, what is generally known about the topic, and then move towards more specific things, going towards what you're going to talk about in the specific case. Okay. It also includes a brief overview of the work and the results. Okay. Introduction should be. So, okay, somebody seems to be speaking. People could mute. Others who are not speaking, that would be appreciated. Okay. The introduction should be specific, not too broad or vague, about 2 pages. So it's not once you're working in an area, it's not the same introduction that they can use for every paper, because the introduction is very specific to what you're presenting in that paper. It's typically nowadays also written in the present tense, and this should not be just a disconnected aggregation of summaries of past work. This person did this person did this person did that. If there is no overall structure to that organization, then that really statements about this person did this person did that really does not contribute any insight to the reader in this case. So your goal in writing this introduction is to organize the material and communicate some insight. Okay. And then again, you do not want to needlessly repeat the same point and have things which are not relevant to your work appear over here in this case. So after the introduction, next section is on methodology. This is where you're presenting the novel approach that you have done, usually in our fields of interest. Okay. Normally, this will have a formulation of the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What essentially are the inputs that are available to you? What are the outputs you're trying to get? And maybe any additional considerations about what resources that you can utilize and so on. If you have a hypothesis about a particular conjecture, then what is the hypothesis that you're trying to prove or disprove in this case? Okay, so this should have a detailed description with text, equations, and figures. And ideally, you want the figures to speak for themselves. The figures also have accompanying text, which is useful, but the figure by itself, if that can give you a quick overview of what you're doing, then that's really worth 1,000 words, as the word says, as the saying says. Okay, so here's the example from our paper. The approach for encoding is very simple. You just encode 3 messages in 3 barcodes, and then you combine them, these color layers, to obtain this color barcode. Okay. So illustrations should be used to provide overview and illustrate the interconnections between the different areas, as this figure is doing in this case. Okay. It will be much harder to sort of describe these in words in ways that somebody would easily and quickly understand the idea as compared to the figure. That's where you use the figures. Okay. After the methodology is the results and discussion section, where you really describe your experiments and analysis. What was the setup that you used? What were the data sources? Why did you choose the data sources? What metrics are you using for the analysis? Why they make sense for this problem if they're not sort of already known and well established in the field of interest or the topic that you're working on? And then finally, summarize results. So rather than just saying, okay, this is what we got from each of the experiments, your goal here is to summarize the results and communicate insight from what are the broader trends that you see in these results. This part should use figures or tables with the narrative to illustrate your findings. Tables present data when your exact values are important to show, and graphs are useful for showing relationships between the data points and trends in the analysis. So you should be choosing between them depending on what is appropriate. In some cases, you may also choose to do both by supplementing graphs and corresponding numerical data in tables presented as supplementary data, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this case. Okay. The discussion should just not be saying, okay, this method performs better than the others. You really should be interpreting the results. So this should be giving some insight into why your approach does better, for example, how it may benefit other researchers or professionals, and also acknowledge any limitations of the work. So if you have obvious limitations you're aware of, those are things you should acknowledge in this case. And potentially highlight connections with other work that can be better appreciated after reading about the proposed work. So there were things you talked about in the introduction, but there may be other aspects that you may be able to much better appreciate after you read the details about the methodology in this case. Okay. The final section of the paper is really the conclusion. And the word conclusion in English has multiple meanings. So its conclusion is the ending of something. Conclusion is also what you've deduced from this. So the appropriate interpretation over here would be trying to explain what the research has accomplished. What is the main finding? What is the take-home message that a reader should go with after having seen this paper? So you're doing a summary of the main findings and implications for the field as it relates to the problem stated in the introduction. Okay, so you should be sort of describing the benefits and shortcomings of the solution you presented, a little bit about the research and methodology that you adopted, and possibly suggest future areas of research. It's good to avoid this being a complete repeat of the abstract. It's only trying to summarize the findings rather than the abstract, which is a summary of the entire article. Okay. So here's an example of the conclusion from that paper we talked about. So I highlight this. The paper is providing an effective method for extending monochrome barcodes to color. This is what it accomplishes. Offers 3 times the reader rates for the single color barcodes by exploiting the color channels that we have in this case. And then the methodology is a model-based interference cancellation approach, which mitigates inter-channel coupling that is introduced due to the physical characteristics of the device. Okay. And then some talk about the bit error rates vary across the 3 resulting channels. The error rates are ranges that are readily handled by correction coding options available for these codes. So implications in terms of actual use for these. Okay. Finally, the final section is usually the references. So this is where you're referring to the prior work. And the references serve 2 important purposes. One is to set the context for your research. So what is the topic you're working on? What has been done in this area previously? And the second is to acknowledge sources of ideas. So the first context for research would largely occur in the introductory section and would occur in this, and maybe the conclusions, when you're talking about the conclusion in the section. The acknowledgement of sources of ideas would often occur in methodology section. If you're borrowing a technique, so maybe using DB scan for clustering, for example, to take a specific example, maybe using this popular clustering algorithm called DB scan, then you would have a reference to that original paper on DB scan talking about when you discuss that in your methodology section. Okay. There's no limit to the number of references in an article, but you should only be using relevant references. Okay. Ensure that you have proper attribution. You've got the author name, title, and these references are typeset completely as per the journal requirements. So here are the examples from this. What I want to highlight over here are there are different types of examples over here. The first one is from a magazine article. The second one is from a journal article. Both are typeset very similarly in the way they're typeset. The third one is from a conference. You will notice things are organized differently. For the conference one, the page numbers are at the end, the date came earlier, and that's because the journal specifies what should be the appropriate typesetting for different types of references. The last one here is a book. Okay, so you should follow the proper conventions for the journal you're submitting to. Okay, IEEE journals normally follow a citation numbering system where these citations are numbered as they're shown over here. Okay, so check on the official published version of the citations. Use a citation manager such as BibTeX, Zotero, EndNote for consistency. And a good tip for you is to download the complete citation records from IEEE Explore for your citation manager rather than from other sources. So often you'll get the same references on Google Scholar, but they're not quite as complete as what you would get from the official publisher in this case. These days, IEEE and almost all other publishers also allow submission of supplemental material, where you are providing material which supplements your main article. So the idea is the article by itself is describing the core work, but you could have other things like data, which you're providing, or maybe you want to share code to make make it accessible to other people so that they can easily reuse your work and build upon it. IEEE strongly encourages these open science practices of sharing data and code when possible to facilitate sort of easy reproducibility of the research. So you're strongly encouraged to do this. It requires a little bit of time, but in the long run actually saves you time and also increases the impact of your research in this case. In the long run, it saves you time because if you've taken the time to organize the data once, then it also becomes very effective for you to also use that data subsequently. And also, you do not have to constantly respond to queries of people asking about it if you've done the job once. Okay. Supplemental content can be usually, if it's data, you can publish that in IEEE data port. There are also other repositories such as Zenodo and Dryad, which allow you to publish data. Figshare also allows you to publish data also, and other content, auxiliary content. For code, CodeOcean is a nice platform which provides a nice web-based interface for anyone who wants to use the data, so that really facilitates reusability. Also importantly, it captures the code as something called a Docker representation, which allows people to easily replicate the environment, not just the specific code, but also the runtime environment that you're running. Okay. In IEEE Explore, the articles with these resources are highlighted with these different icons indicating dataset available, whether the dataset has been reviewed, dataset is reproducible, dataset is replicated, and similar icons for code in this case also. Right. So that was a quick overview of paper structure and writing. I'll now talk a little bit about the submission process and peer review. So peer review is what is considered the standard in all scientific publishing today. So this is where when you submit your paper, the decision on whether the paper gets published or not is based on feedback provided on this paper by experts in the field. So depending on what is your level and what level of career you are at, peer may or may not be the right term to use. If you're starting at an early stage, the people providing feedback are probably more experienced than you. They're not necessarily completely your peers. They're probably your seniors, but that's the terminology that is used. So you submit your paper, and the paper goes through a number of sort of volunteers who are assisting in the publication process and the reviewers. All of these are invariably unpaid volunteers doing this for the benefit of the community. Okay, so they recognize, so for instance, IEEE transaction image processing, the editorial board is focused on people who work on image processing. They would like to support and grow the image processing community. So they're doing this service to the community as altruistic service for the benefit of the community. Okay. The selection process normally involves getting feedback. So it involves a number of filters. For instance, if your paper is, the title is unclear, it's also unclear based on the title whether it fits a given journal or not, the editor-in-chief himself may decide, wait a minute, this is not relevant to my journal, or this is not clear enough, and reject in this case. Associate editors have finer knowledge about specific areas of interest. If the associate editor passes this on, the associate editor may still make the decision, wait a minute, this paper is not clear enough, is missing some very basic things that should be here, and recommend rejection in this case. Finally, when papers pass those 2 bars, they would go on to reviewers. And IEEE publications policy requires that you have at least 2 independent reviewers on the relevant research areas providing feedback to help assess whether a manuscript should be published in this journal or not. Often we're looking for 3 is the common number, but you can also work based on 2. Okay. Feedback from the peer reviewers contributes to the decision, but the ultimate decision is based on the expertise of the associate editor and the editor-in-chief in the field of interest. So they're not just counting the reviews, it's not just counting votes, but they're actually looking at the substance and the substantiation of the comments in the reviews. So what is the reviewer saying, and how well have they substantiated this in their responses? If you're submitting, before you submit, it will be author center to make sure that you're not missing some very basic things before you submit. So make sure you review the submission guidelines for the publication journal that you're trying to submit to check things like length restrictions. Maybe lot of journals restrict the length of the main article, providing you to have supplementary material which is longer, but the main article has to have a certain number of pages, no more than a certain number of pages. Make sure you met any disclosure requirements in terms of disclosing any external interests that may impact the sort of unbiasedness of a report and so on. And then a key decision is to make who will serve as the article's corresponding author. This is the person who is communicating with the journal with any aspects related to the manuscript. If your article has multiple authors, which is what most articles today do, the corresponding author is the one who holds this responsibility. And they should understand the responsibilities. So part of the responsibility is to make sure the article they're submitting has the concurrence of all the other authors, that this is the article that they're agreed to being submitted on. So a good practice often is to download once you have the proof of the article from the submission site, a good practice is to share that with all the authors and say, this is what I'm about to submit. Please make sure that you agree with this. If you do not have an ORCID already, make sure you get one. ORCID is what is increasingly used as the unique identifier for authors. This is the Open Research and Contributor ID. It's easily available for free. You can establish one as a way to establish your identity. It's also helpful for individuals like myself. My name has become quite common these days, to the point where on some flights, there have been 3 people with the same name as me on the same flight. So in disambiguating which one of the Gaurav Sharmas an article corresponds to, the ORCID becomes useful because the ORCID is unique to each individual. Okay. Some of the things to keep in mind regarding novelty and what the editors and reviewers are looking for, you're looking for new ideas, new tools, new methodologies, new applications, also possibly interdisciplinary research domains. So your article may have novelty in different aspects. Maybe you've solved a problem that exists already using new methodology. That's the most common sort of instance of new papers in our fields of interest. But you could also possibly open up a different area of interest, completely new problem area. You could also develop new tools which are addressing this problem in a totally different way and applicable to a wide variety of problems, or address new applications. Often you could also have interdisciplinary research, which is really producing a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. So you're combining these things from different disciplines to solve a problem which is really would be much harder to do after that. Okay. So an example of this I could draw is from some of our old work. We've done some work on sort of cancellation of show-through. So this was adopting ideas from telecommunications, from voice speech communication over landline networks, which many of you would not be aware of, for document processing. Okay, similar ideas are there. You can find in a number of other applications also. Okay, now one tip for you is that often you get back a rejection saying, okay, the paper is not novel enough, and then you're often quite angry. Wait a minute, the reviewers did not invest the time to really understand the work. Okay. My advice to you would be to take that with a grain of salt. When you get a rejection, let it sit for a couple of days, then think objectively and read it carefully. Okay. Invariably, when I've done this, I've realized that part of the challenge, at least, was on my side in not making sure that the paper was clearly describing what was the novel contribution and making it easy for the reader to understand. So a poorly written paper with poor notation, unreadable figures will invariably hurt your chances of getting published. So again, this is a repeat of what I said earlier, but you're looking for content that is original, and it could be advancing previously published work. So it'd be an extension of previously published work, but should not be just very incremental. So it not just be that, okay, you've done this minor difference. They did this for ABC type of printers. We're doing this for D-type printer also in this case. Okay, methodology should be sound, and other details should also be worked out in this case. Okay. Common reason where papers are rejected are the converse setting, where the content is not a good fit for the publication. There could be serious scientific flaws in the work, so your results are not really substantiated by the work you've done, or your methodology is inappropriate for the particular problem setting. There is a particular data set which is really established as a gold standard for which things should be benchmarked on, and you've not really included that in your evaluation. The presentation could be poorly written, structured, or presented, and maybe the work is too incremental in this case. Does not really advance the field significantly enough. Okay. And the goal is, the sort of onus is on you to make a strong case to convince the reviewers that this is really impactful work that needs to be published in the journal. Okay. So you could have sort of simulation-only papers where the work is correct but has no really meaningful practical impact. Okay. And that's something I would urge you to try and avoid. In some cases, there may be some usefulness to this, but then you should at least project about how this work may be relevant and would actually have relevant impact. Okay. When revising your article in response to a peer review, the decision letter is what I would suggest that you read very, very in detail to see what the reviewer suggestions are for how the article should be improved, and also the guidance from the points that you should specifically try and address in this case. Revise and resubmit is a very common decision when you encounter an article. So that's something you should commonly not be surprised to receive in this case. Okay. So I've already highlighted the fact that you should keep an open mind, that the peer reviewer is there to help you rather than an obstacle to keep you from being published. And your response letter should include a detailed point-by-point reply to every suggestion that the reviewers have made. Okay. And then if you're making changes in your article, you should be specific in saying, this is the change we made to the article, this is where the change is. Your response should be in full grammatical sentences and paragraphs, not just one-word replies. And you should always be respectful and appreciative of the reviewer's time. As already highlighted, they're doing this as volunteer service to the community rather than as something they're getting paid for in this case. But at the same time, you should not be pushed into making changes or additions that are inappropriate and unnecessary. Okay. Again, look at the Author Center, which has a lot of good information on this. Okay, so finally, I'm on ethics. And I think in terms of time check, I think I'm a little bit behind compared to where I intended to be. So I will maybe speed up a little bit. There are a number of types of misconduct that you may encounter in scientific publishing. So a few years ago, the plagiarism was the major form of misconduct, where people were verbatim copying parts of other articles without really citing the source. Increasingly, there has been new types of misconduct that we encounter, where you've maybe borrowed and rephrased what a particular paper said, but not really given a citation. There are aspects of citation coercing, where a reviewer may be asking you to cite, or an editor may be asking you to cite papers which are totally irrelevant to the work that you're publishing. Citation stacking, where authors may be grabbing together to try and cite each other's papers in a way to increase the number of times the paper is cited and so on. And also paper mills, where somebody is offering you to be an author on a paper with a paper in slot 1, slot 2, slot 3 in a given publication. Okay. All of these are things which you should seriously try and avoid and adopt ethical publishing practices. Okay. So for plagiarism, the guideline is that everything you write in your paper is assumed to be your own words or ideas. If you're borrowing words from anywhere else, the word should be quoted very clearly. And quotation clearly demarcated as this part is coming from this other source verbatim, and then include a citation. If you're paraphrasing, meaning you're describing other people's work in your own, other ideas in your own words, you still have the burden of citing the original work. You describe in your own words, but then include a citation. Okay. So importance is to give credit to ideas from all other sources. Okay. And this is the IEEE policy regarding this. Okay. And I will highlight. Among other things, all publications go to cross-check from iAuthenticate, which looks for verbatim borrowing of content from other sources. These tools are also becoming refined as increasingly things evolve. Okay. If you're reusing material from any prior publication, that must be clearly cited and acknowledged. For example, if you're using a diagram from an existing figure, you have to get permission from the author or publisher, who is the copyright owner, and cite and acknowledge. If you redraw the diagram on your own, you should still cite and say adapted for on based on. And by the way, this also includes your own prior published work. So if you publish one paper and you're publishing another paper in the same topic, which is using the same broad figure for the broader background area, then you should acknowledge the prior diagram that you reuse in this case. Right? These days, AI is something you cannot escape. And the question arises about how can you use AI for writing a paper? So you could do this in various aspects, but the key requirement that IEEE has is that any such use should be clearly disclosed. Okay. So the AI system that has used should be identified, and specific sections of an article that have used AI-generated content should be identified. Okay. Why is this? Because this allows both the readers and the reviewers to look at this content. AI sometimes hallucinates, gets things wrong. This allows you to focus on those parts to make sure those parts are appropriately checked in this case. That's something you should already be doing as an author, because the primary responsibility for the content, regardless of what tools you use, lies on you as the author in this case. Certain kind of use of AI systems is quite acceptable, such as for editing, grammar enhancement, and is outside the content of this above policy. So it does not really require Okay. All right. So more details on this, please look at the publication ethics policy. This policy is also evolving both for IEEE and for other publishers as AI tools also evolve. Here's a sample acknowledgement from an IEEE paper about the use of AI tools for writing certain aspects. So a general note on peer review and AI. So in terms of peer review, if you're also reviewing for a journal, then the expectation is that you will not share the submitted article with an AI platform as a mechanism for generating a review. And there is good reason for this. Most of the open AI platforms will reuse the content that is fed into them for developing the models further. The content of an article that is under review is confidential information. So if you're a reviewer, you're not authorized to share that beyond yourself for the review purpose. So you're breaching review confidentiality by sharing this article more broadly, okay, with an AI platform. Some comments about duplicate submissions. So you may think, wait a minute, I have this paper that I've written and I want to submit it to this journal, but this journal seems to take a really long time to review. So let me maybe consider submitting to 2 journals, and then depending on what answers they give me, I'll decide which one I want to go with and who comes back sooner. So this practice is completely taboo and unacceptable in scientific publishing. So the same articles should not be submitted to multiple journals or to multiple venues at the same time. And there's good reason for this. When talking about the review process, the first thing I outlined was that you're going to use up resources of a number of experienced volunteers for the community in consuming their time for the review process. So you do not want this to be wasteful of their time and energy. And This is therefore completely unacceptable. In some cases, there may also be copyright issues. So if you've transferred the copyright or agreed to transfer the copyright to a publisher based on acceptance of the article, then you obviously do not have the same capability to do that for the other one. So you should not be doing this. So this idea that it would be faster if you try two places at the same time is a bad idea. If you already submitted to one journal, it's taking too much time, then you have as an author, it's your prerogative to decide if you want to withdraw. You can ask for the status, and either the journal staff will respond. If you're not happy with that, it's your prerogative to withdraw and then consider submission to another place. But at the same time, you cannot submit to two places at the same time. Some comments about work in progress and building up to a journal paper. So you may have a short work in progress conference paper, which reports upon work that you've been developing in this case. And then that evolves into a larger full-length journal article, which is more comprehensive. This is completely acceptable in most of our fields of interest. Okay. The expectation is the later article will contain, which is the more comprehensive article, will contain more information than the earlier short-length conference articles, as you've worked on this over progress, and should clearly cite and acknowledge the prior work. Okay. So you should cite the prior article and clearly indicate how these two articles differ. Some fields and publications treat long comprehensive conference papers more like journal papers, so check on specific journal policy. If in doubt, ask experienced colleagues. So a professor, colleagues who you worked with, senior students, and so on, would be good resources to ask about such issues. Ultimately, if you don't get an answer and are still having doubts, then feel free to email the EIC. But first, exploit local resources before burdening the EIC with a response to a question for which you could easily get the answer at your local institution itself. Okay. So I've already highlighted several of this. The expectation is that when you're submitting work for peer review, the work should not have appeared anywhere else. You're looking at original work that you've not published somewhere else, is not under review somewhere else for publication. You've cited all previous work, including your own, which may possibly be still under review rather than already published. Indicate how it differs from the published work, and if you're submitting any previously published work, for if there's some reason why you want to publish this, and there is a reason why you're publishing something which is already previously published in some form, then you must inform the editor. Okay. Some IEEE journals are also starting to require now that if you were resubmitting a manuscript that was previously rejected by another journal, then you have to specify this and provide what changes you have made in order to address the concerns that were raised in the previous review process. And there's reason for this, because the peer review system is under tremendous overload at this point in time. It's very hard to get peer reviews for our submitted articles. So you want to make sure that the feedback that is received to a submission at one point in time is actually meaningfully addressed before the article is submitted again for peer review. And all right. So in summary, getting published can be challenging when you're starting out as a new author, but by knowing sort of what the landscape looks like and avoiding the major pitfalls, you can really improve your chances that for your early stage submissions also, you have a good outcome, direct these to the right venue, get the relevant feedback, improve the work, and then get it published. Okay. In this process, you should really review this review process as providing useful feedback rather than obstacles standing between you and publishing in this case. So feedback often can improve your work and suggest new ideas for you to work on. Some of the best ideas that I have come up with have been based on reviewers offering feedback and offering suggestions. Wait a minute, your work is addressing this application case. Could you do something in this different setting? Maybe a reviewer could ask that question. Okay. So ultimately, publishing provides you benefits, not only in terms of the direct tangible benefits that you would have in terms of metrics and your career if you are in research or in a field like academia where publications are valued, but also in terms of your own understanding of the work, the field, and possible contributions going forward. So keep that in mind. A few comments on authorship. So authorship should be restricted to individuals who have substantively contributed to the work
and importantly, review the final manuscript and agree with the contents to be listed in author. Okay. So this is not something you should be just inviting your friends to be co-authors with you. This is also why paper mills are a terrible idea, where they're offering you authorship slots on papers which they are indicating are already going to be published in a given venue. Importantly, if there's any ethics violation associated with a given submission, then all authors share responsibility for the ethics violation. So often it would happen the case that there was a paper which had substantial plagiarism in my journal when I was the editor-in-chief. And when the question came around, the professors would claim, wait a minute, this isn't the student did without my knowledge at all. Okay. In these situations, I was completely unsympathetic to the professor's argument. If they have their name listed as an author, they're willing to take credit, then they should have done the work up front to make sure the student is appropriately trained, also to double check the things, to make sure there is no major this thing. There are a few exceptions to this, but by and large, that's the guidance. Okay. People who've consulted and offered advice should be acknowledged. It's a good idea, maybe a good idea to let them know that you're acknowledging, but do not make this a friends and family plan by trying to include your friends and family as co-authors who've not really contributed. Okay. Similarly, these days, there's a lot of emphasis on bibliometrics, trying to look at citation counts and impact factors, which is totally the wrong idea in this case. So anybody who thinks the number of times something is discussed in the media or generally discussed should be really a measure of how impactful some work is really putting all scientists behind all politicians. The politicians these days rely primarily on sensationalism and on sort of increasing reference to themselves in the media. So they have, if you were to take these sort of generalizations of bibliometric metrics, their impact factors are much, much higher than what you would have for any, or H indices are much higher than what you would have for any scientific publications. So the idea is that science should work based on relevance. You should cite your own papers when they're relevant, not to increase your citation counts, and do not give into inappropriate pressure to cite irrelevant material during peer review. If a reviewer is pressuring you to cite a paper which is clearly irrelevant, please let the EIC know and make it clear in your response. Usually there are good governance policies in IEEE to deal with such instances. If a reviewer is doing this systemically multiple times, they will be banned as a reviewer and as publisher from publishing in IEEE if they're doing this unethically in this case. And the same thing applies for you as a reviewer when you're reviewing. Make sure you follow appropriate ethical practices and ask somebody to cite a paper only if it's relevant, not just because it's your paper that you would want. Okay. So with that, I come to the conclusion of my segment. Thank you so much for all your participation. I know you have been asking a number of questions in the chat. I'll be responding to some of those. So people have also been responding to those as they can, but I'll also take over now responding to the ones which would be relevant to me. And I can talk. Thank you.
Yeah, so Prof, I have pushed some of the unique questions to your inbox, so you can answer those.
So Ranbir will take over next, and he'll be talking about IEEE Explore. So I'll hand over the baton to Ranbir.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Very good evening. My name is Ranbir Singh, and thank you for joining today's IEEE Authorship Symposium. We do this every year, and a special thanks to Professor Gaurav Sharma for his insightful talk. I'm sure the session will be immensely valuable, not only for young and aspiring authors, budding authors, but also for the seasoned researchers, helping them to gain stronger perspective from publishers' side. My name is Ranbir Singh, and I represent IEEE client services across India, Middle East, Asia, Africa, Bangladesh, and CIS countries. My team and I work to ensure that you stay updated on IEEE Explore, the platform, the research and innovation platform that provides access to work to ensure that that gives you access to world's 1/3 literature in the field of electrical, electronics, computer science, and many other related technical fields. So in next 10 to 15 minutes, I know that we are running short of time. I will give you a super quick overview of the key tools and the services available to authors through IEEE Explore. And as Professor has rightly mentioned, that the impactful research must contribute new and meaningful knowledge to the field. So that's why we recommend using IEEE Explore regularly to conduct thorough and comprehensive literature review, and strengthen your research foundation. So to begin with, this is the landing page of IEEE Explore Digital Library, which is a home to more than 6 million plus full text technical documents, including conference papers, journal articles, standards, ebook chapters, and e-learning courses. And again, according to the latest patent citation report by 1790 Analytics, IEEE content is cited 3 times more often in patent than any other publisher, making it one of the best resource for literature. This is the critical first step in any authorship journey. We also provide, when I say we, I mean to say IEEE also provide early access to peer-reviewed content up to 2 months before the final publication date, helping authors to stay ahead of emerging research, refine their own work, and as Professor has highlighted, that it is always a good practice to read a good number of publications that good number of articles from the publication that you're targeting. This would help you to understand the editorial preferences, uh, the kind of the review patterns and the style or the kind of papers or the articles that they accept. So to support this, IEEE allows you to create your personal account, a free personal account. With it, you can set alerts for your favorite journals, conferences, ensuring that you're always updated with latest content in your area of research. So there's a global search box that appears on almost every page of Explore. By default, it automatically ANDs your keyword and searches across document metadata. It also accounts for plurals, verb tenses, British American spelling variations. But for an exact phrase match, you should use the quotation marks. You can also apply Boolean operators like and, or, and not directly in the search box. Just remember, the only rule is that you have to type these Boolean operator, which is and, or, and not, all in the capital letters, block letters. If no operator is added, by default, the search engine will take and as an operator.